The marble floors of Crescent National Bank gleamed beneath the afternoon lights, reflecting the polished shoes of customers who moved in and out with practiced urgency. It was the kind of place designed to impress: tall glass windows, gold-lettered logos, and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Behind the long counter stood rows of bank tellers in tailored uniforms, their smiles rehearsed, their movements efficient. Screens glowed softly in front of them, numbers flowing in and out of accounts that most people would never fully understand. It was just past noon when the glass doors opened. Again, an elderly man stepped inside. His coat was worn at the elbows, a heavy brown wool that had seen many winters. His shoes were clean but outdated, carefully polished yet visibly old. In one hand, he carried a small canvas bag, faded from years of use. His gray hair was neatly combed back, and though his posture was slightly stooped, there was something steady about the way he walked. His name was Walter Hayes. Most customers barely noticed him. A few glanced in his direction before returning to their phones. One man in an expensive suit instinctively tightened his grip on his leather briefcase as Walter passed. Walter approached the customer service line slowly, scanning the overhead board for assistance. There were only 2 tellers open, and the queue was short. He stood quietly at the end, waiting his turn. Behind the counter, a young teller named Brittany Miller noticed him almost immediately. She was 26, ambitious and eager to climb the corporate ladder. To her, Crescent National was not just a workplace, it was a stepping stone. She studied finance at night and believed she could recognize wealth by instinct: the brand of a watch, the cut of a jacket, the confidence in someone's stride. When her eyes landed on Walter's coat, her lips curved into a faint, involuntary smirk. She leaned toward the teller beside her and whispered something. The other teller glanced up briefly and suppressed a laugh. Walter stepped forward. When his turn came, Brittany straightened her posture and arranged her face into a professional expression, though the trace of amusement lingered at the corners of her mouth. Walter removed a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. It was a withdrawal slip, filled out carefully in blue ink. His handwriting was neat but slightly shaky. He slid it across the counter, along with his identification. Brittany glanced at the slip and felt her amusement deepen. The withdrawal amount was large enough to raise suspicion. Her eyes flicked from the number to Walter's worn coat, then back to the number again. She let out a small laugh before she could stop herself. It was not loud enough to echo through the bank, but it was loud enough for Walter to hear. He did not react. He simply stood there, hands resting lightly on the counter, waiting. Brittany cleared her throat and began typing his account number into the system. Her expression carried the faintest hint of disbelief, as though she were certain there must be a mistake. Perhaps he had written the wrong amount. Perhaps he had misunderstood his own balance. The computer screen loaded, and then it displayed his account details at first. Brittany thought she had misread it. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. The balance on the screen was not modest. It was not average. It was staggering. The number extended far beyond what she had imagined: 7 figures, steady and untouched for years, growing quietly through investments and interest. Her smile disappeared. She leaned closer to the monitor as if proximity would change the digits. It did not. Behind Walter, the next customer in line shifted impatiently. The marble floors reflected the subtle tension gathering at the counter. Walter remained calm. Brittany swallowed and clicked through additional account details, half expecting to find an error. Instead, she found a history of disciplined deposits, long-term investments, and charitable transfers made regularly to organizations she recognized: veterans funds, scholarship foundations, community housing programs. Her cheeks began to warm. She realized then that the laugh she had let slip only moments earlier felt heavier than it had at the time. Walter noticed a change in her demeanor. He had seen it before in many forms, in stores, at restaurants, even at neighborhood meetings. The quick judgment, the assumption that modest clothing meant limited means. He did not take offense easily. Life had taught him patience. Brittany processed the withdrawal silently now, her earlier confidence replaced by cautious professionalism. She counted the cash twice before placing it carefully on the counter. Walter gathered the money without rush, placing it neatly into his canvas bag. For a brief second, their eyes met. His gaze held no anger, no triumph, only quiet understanding. That was what unsettled her most as he turned to leave. The bank manager, Mr. Caldwell, stepped out of his office. He had been reviewing reports but had noticed Brittany's sudden stillness through the glass. His eyes followed Walter across the lobby. Recognition dawned. Mr. Caldwell hurried forward, extending his hand warmly as Walter reached the doors. The two men shook hands with familiarity, not as strangers, but as acquaintances of long standing. Several customers glanced over. Brittany watched from behind the counter, confusion tightening in her chest. She had assumed Walter was a struggling pensioner withdrawing his last savings. She had not imagined he was one of Crescent National's earliest investors. She had not imagined that his modest deposits, decades ago, had helped stabilize the bank during its uncertain beginnings. She had not imagined that the worn coat belonged to a man who valued simplicity over display. As Walter exited into the afternoon sunlight, Mr. Caldwell turned back toward the staff. His expression was thoughtful. Brittany felt a wave of realization wash over her. The numbers on the screen had silenced her laughter. But something deeper was beginning to stir. Something that would soon force the entire branch to confront the cost of assumptions. Walter stepped onto the sidewalk, adjusting his coat against the wind. He had not come to prove anything. He had only come to make a withdrawal. Yet sometimes the simplest actions reveal the greatest truths, and inside Crescent National Bank, a lesson had just begun unfolding, one that would not end with a balance sheet. The glass doors of Crescent National Bank closed softly behind Walter Hayes, but the silence he left inside lingered longer than the echo of the hinges. For a few seconds, the entire lobby felt unusually still. Brittany stood frozen behind her terminal, the numbers from Walter's account still glowing on her screen as if they were burned into her vision. 7 figures, long-term investments, decades of quiet growth, charitable transfers that reflected generosity. Rather than greed, the man she had laughed at had more financial discipline than most of the executives who walked through those doors daily. Across the lobby, Mr. Caldwell adjusted his tie and returned to his office, but not before casting a subtle glance toward the teller counter. It was not a harsh look. It was not accusatory. It was knowing. Brittany felt her stomach tighten. The next customer stepped forward. A sharply dressed man in his early 30s. His watch gleamed under the lights. His cologne filled the air before he even reached the counter. Brittany forced herself to focus, processing his routine deposit with automatic efficiency. But her mind was elsewhere. She replayed the small laugh, the whisper to her colleague, the certainty she had felt. When she saw the withdrawal amount, she had believed she could read wealth in seconds. Mr. Caldwell called Brittany into his office. The manager's office overlooked the lobby through tall glass panels, offering a clear view of both customers and staff. On the walls hung framed awards celebrating the bank's growth over the years, expansion milestones, community service recognitions, corporate achievements. Brittany entered with controlled composure. Though her pulse was noticeably quickened, Mr. Caldwell gestured for her to sit. He did not raise his voice. He did not mention the laugh directly. Instead, he began with something unexpected. He spoke about Crescent National's early days. He described a time when the bank had struggled to earn trust in the community, when larger institutions dominated the market and customers hesitated. To invest in something new, Walter Hayes had been among the first to open a substantial account. Not flashy, not publicized, but significant. He had believed in the bank when others did not. He had invested patiently, reinvested dividends, and refused special treatment. Over time, his account had grown alongside the institution itself. Mr. Caldwell explained that Walter had once declined an invitation to join the advisory board, stating simply that he preferred a quiet life. Brittany listened, each word settling. Heavily, the manager paused, then added that character cannot be measured by clothing or posture. That in banking, as in life, numbers often tell a different story than appearances. He dismissed her gently, without formal reprimand. That almost made it worse. Brittany returned to her station feeling smaller than she had in years. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. She processed transactions, printed receipts, and nodded politely at customers. But something fundamental had shifted inside her. She began noticing details. She had previously overlooked the elderly woman who counted coins slowly but maintained impeccable financial records. The construction worker depositing weekly savings with consistent discipline. The young student asking cautious questions about interest rates, clearly determined to build something stable. Wealth, she realized, was not always loud. Sometimes it was patient. Sometimes it wore worn coats. Outside, Walter walked several blocks before stopping at a modest brick building tucked between a pharmacy and a bakery. A simple sign above the door read, "Community Outreach Foundation." He stepped inside. The funds he had withdrawn were not for personal luxury. They were designated for the Foundation's scholarship program, an annual initiative supporting students from low-income families pursuing business and finance degrees. Walter believed deeply in second chances. He had grown up in a small rural town where money was scarce and opportunity even scarcer. His first investment had come from years of careful savings and a refusal to spend beyond necessity. He had never chased status. He had chased stability, and stability, he believed, should be shared. That evening, as Brittany drove home in her compact sedan, the day replayed in her mind. The polished marble floors of the bank felt different in memory now, less impressive, more hollow. She realized that her ambition had quietly hardened into judgment. She had begun categorizing people by visual cues, believing efficiency justified assumption, but the truth was more uncomfortable. She had equated simplicity with insignificance. The following morning, Crescent National Bank buzzed with its usual rhythm. But word of Walter's account had quietly circulated among staff, not as gossip, but as revelation. Several tellers approached Brittany cautiously, curiosity flickering in their eyes. She did not deflect. She admitted her mistake. The humility surprised even herself. Over the next few days, Brittany found herself paying closer attention to each customer, not their clothing, but their habits. Not their accessories, but their discipline. She began asking thoughtful questions about savings goals. She offered information about investment options to customers she might previously have overlooked. And then, 3 days later, the glass doors opened again. Walter Hayes stepped inside. He wore the same worn coat, the same polished shoes, the same calm expression. But this time, Brittany noticed something she had missed before. His eyes carried depth, not the sharpness of wealth flaunted, but the steadiness of wisdom earned. He approached her counter. The bank felt quieter again. Brittany stood straighter, not out of intimidation, but respect. She greeted him with genuine professionalism, her tone measured and sincere. Walter handed over a deposit slip this time. The amount was modest compared to his balance, but steady. Brittany processed it carefully, ensuring every detail was correct. As she handed him the receipt, their eyes met again, and though no words passed between them beyond necessary formalities, something unspoken lingered by forgiveness. Perhaps, or simply acknowledgement. Walter left as quietly as he had before. But this time, there was no laughter, only understanding. Yet the lesson unfolding at Crescent National was not finished. Because sometimes, growth demands more than silent reflection. Sometimes, demands action, and soon. Walter's quiet influence would ripple beyond one teller's awakening, reaching into the very culture of the bank itself. The days following Walter Hayes' second visit to Crescent National Bank unfolded with subtle but undeniable change. At first, it was barely noticeable. A shift in tone, a softening in posture, a pause before assumption. But within the polished walls of the branch, something was recalibrating. Brittany felt it most. She began arriving earlier each morning, reviewing customer profiles not with skepticism, but with curiosity. She studied patterns, consistent savings, disciplined withdrawals, small deposits that told stories of hard work rather than scarcity. She realized how many narratives she had overlooked because they did not match her internal image of success. Mr. Caldwell noticed the shift as well. He observed Brittany spending extra time explaining retirement accounts to older clients. He saw her patiently guiding first-time account holders through investment basics. He watched her treat each customer as if their financial journey mattered, because now she understood that it did. Walter, meanwhile, continued his routine. He visited the bank twice more over the next month. Each visit was quiet, purposeful. He deposited modest checks from dividend returns and transferred funds to various charitable initiatives. He never lingered longer than necessary. But word of his long-standing support for the bank had begun to spread among senior leadership. Crescent National's headquarters, located in a sleek tower downtown, had recently launched a campaign emphasizing community trust and financial literacy. They were searching for authentic stories to highlight real clients, whose loyalty embodied the bank's values. Walter's name surfaced quickly when corporate representatives reviewed his account history. They discovered more than numbers. They found decades of consistency, investments made not for spectacle, but stability, donations quietly supporting education, housing, and veterans' rehabilitation programs. His file was thick with history, yet absent of publicity. To the executives, Walter Hayes represented something rare, a credibility without ego. Back at the branch, Renee received an unexpected internal memo requesting a brief report on Walter's recent transactions and interactions. It was procedural, nothing unusual. But as she typed her summary, she paused over her description of him. She did not mention his coat. She did not mention the first day. Instead, she wrote about his composure, his financial discipline, his long-term trust in the institution for the first time. She described a customer based on character rather than appearance. 2 weeks later, a black sedan pulled up outside Crescent National Bank just before closing time. Customers glanced curiously as to corporate executives entered the lobby. They spoke briefly with Mr. Caldwell, then requested to meet Walter Hayes the next time he visited. The branch buzzed with speculation after they left. Walter's next visit came sooner than expected. He entered on a quiet Thursday morning, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Brittany recognized him immediately, offering a respectful greeting before she could complete his transaction. Mr. Caldwell approached, inviting Walter into his office. The door closed gently behind them. Inside, the atmosphere was warm but formal. Mr. Caldwell explained that headquarters wished to honor Walter's decades of loyalty. They planned to establish a scholarship fund in his name, an expansion of the very causes he had supported privately. Walter listened quietly. He had never sought recognition. In fact, recognition made him slightly uncomfortable. His investments had been personal decisions rooted in belief rather than branding. But Mr. Caldwell clarified that the scholarship would not be about publicity. It would be about legacy. Walter had spent years mentoring young people through community outreach. Many of those students pursued careers in finance, hoping to create stability for their families. The bank wanted to amplify that impact. Walter considered the proposal carefully. He agreed on one condition. The scholarship recipients would remain the focus, not him, when he exited the office. Brittany noticed a subtle difference in his expression. Not pride, but contemplation. Within days, Crescent National publicly announced the Hayes Community Scholarship Initiative, highlighting financial literacy and long-term investment principles. The campaign emphasized humility, patience, and trust, values Walter embodied quietly for decades. The announcement spread across local media, but the most significant impact occurred within the branch itself. Staff meetings shifted tone. Mr. Caldwell began incorporating discussions about unconscious bias and client perception into weekly briefings. Not as reprimands, but as growth opportunities. Brittany volunteered to share her experience. Standing before her colleagues, she described the moment she had laughed. She spoke about the assumption she had made and the realization that followed. She did not dramatize it. She simply acknowledged it. Her vulnerability sparked conversation. Other tellers admitted similar instincts, quick judgments based on attire, age, or demeanor. The branch began implementing internal reminders, emphasizing equal service standards. Walter's influence, though unintended, had begun reshaping the culture. Meanwhile, the first Hayes Scholarship recipients were announced. 3 students from modest backgrounds pursuing degrees in finance and economics. Their stories mirrored Walter's early struggles. Limited means, strong discipline, quiet determination. At a small ceremony held in the bank's lobby, Walter stood beside the students as they received certificates. He wore the same worn coat, the same polished shoes, but this time, no one saw them as indicators of limitation. They saw them as symbols of authenticity. Brittany watched from a few feet away, reflecting on how much had changed since that first afternoon. She realized that Walter's greatest investment had not been financial. It had been moral. He had invested in patience when confronted with judgment. He had invested in generosity without expectation. He had invested in people rather than perception. And that investment was compounding. As the ceremony concluded, one of the scholarship students approached Walter with visible gratitude. The young man's eyes shone with determination, the same steadiness Walter had carried for decades. In that moment, Brittany understood something profound. Balance sheets measure wealth, but character measures impact. Walter left the bank shortly after, declining additional interviews or photographs. He preferred to return to anonymity, but the branch no longer felt the same without him. The marble floors still gleamed. The counters still reflected polished professionalism. Yet beneath the surface, something deeper had been corrected. Still, life has a way of testing whether lessons truly take root, and soon, Crescent National would face a situation that would determine whether Walter's quiet influence had been temporary or transformational. Autumn arrived quietly, brushing the city in gold and amber. Leaves gathered along the sidewalks outside Crescent National Bank, swirling in small circles whenever the wind passed through the street. Inside, the branch felt subtly different than it had months earlier. The change was not in the marble floors or the polished counters. It was not in the sleek screens displaying fluctuating markets. The change was in the atmosphere. Staff members moved with a heightened awareness, not of status, but of responsibility. Conversations with customers were slower, more intentional. Questions were asked with genuine interest rather than assumption. Walter Hayes had not returned in several weeks. His absence was not alarming. He had never been a frequent visitor. But his presence lingered in framed photographs from the scholarship ceremony and in the quiet humility that now defines staff interactions. Then, on a particularly busy Friday afternoon, the doors opened to a familiar scene. An elderly woman stepped inside, pushing a small wheeled cart. Her coat was thin for the season. Her hair was tied neatly in a bun, though strands had escaped in the wind. She approached the counter hesitantly. Clutching a stack of documents, Brittany noticed her immediately. Months ago, she might have assumed the woman needed basic assistance, perhaps to resolve a minor issue or close a small account. But now, she stepped forward with deliberate respect. The woman explained through trembling hands and careful paperwork that she had received a notice regarding a potential account closure due to inactivity. She feared losing the modest savings she had accumulated over decades. Her voice was soft, her posture uncertain. Brittany guided her gently to a seat and reviewed the documents thoroughly. What she discovered was not dramatic in numerical value. The account held only a few $1,000s. But the transaction history revealed something meaningful. Steady deposits over 30 years. Small, disciplined savings built from part-time wages and pension checks. It was not wealth by corporate standards, but it was dignity. Brittany resolved the issue efficiently, ensuring the account remained secure and advising the woman on options to protect her savings. She explained everything patiently, her tone steady and kind. When the elderly woman left, relief visible in her eyes, Mr. Caldwell observed from his office. He saw not just professionalism, but growth. Later that afternoon, a different kind of test arrived. A sharply dressed investor entered the bank, speaking loudly about a recent market downturn. He demanded priority treatment, waving his platinum account card as proof of importance. The old version of the branch might have responded with quiet compliance and flattery. But this time, something else occurred. While respecting the client's account status, staff maintained equal courtesy toward others waiting in line. There was no rushing, no visible hierarchy in tone. Respect, not preference. The investor eventually lowered his voice. Sensing the calm consistency around him, Brittany processed his transaction with the same composure she had offered the elderly woman earlier. In that moment, she realized the lesson had fully settled. True professionalism is impartial. That evening, as the branch prepared to close, a letter arrived addressed to Mr. Caldwell. It was from Walter Hayes. The envelope was simple, handwritten in steady ink. Inside, Walter expressed gratitude for the scholarship initiative's progress. He mentioned receiving updates from one of the students, who had recently secured an internship at a financial firm. He wrote about the importance of institutions remembering their human foundation. He reflected briefly on his first visit months. Protects both the giver and the receiver. He concluded with a simple statement. Wealth grows best where respect is planted first. Mr. Caldwell shared the letter during the following week's staff meeting. Silence filled the room as the words settled. Brittany felt a quiet emotion rise within her. Not guilt anymore, but he had allowed his example to teach. The Hayes Community Scholarship Initiative continued expanding, drawing attention beyond the local community. Applications increased. Stories of perseverance filled selection committees with renewed purpose. Crescent, the air crisp and sharp. He entered wearing the same worn coat. But this time, of his account balance, scholarship recipients displayed in the lobby. He studied it with quiet satisfaction before stepping back into the cold. Outside, snow began to fall softly, dusting his shoulders as he walked away. Inside the bank, investments reviewed, but beneath the surface of numbers and balances, something more enduring had taken root, a recognition that true wealth is not announced by clothing. It is revealed by character, and sometimes the greatest silence is not the one that follows laughter. It is the silence of realization when judgment dissolves and respect takes its place. Walter Hayes never intended to teach a lesson that day he walked into Crescent National Bank. He only intended to make a withdrawal. Yet what he withdrew was assumption, and what he deposited was dignity. The numbers on a screen had silenced a laugh, but the true balance, the one that mattered most, had been restored in the hearts of those who learned to look deeper.